We're going to go ahead and get started. As you can see, we actually have quite a few presenters for a very short period of time. So we're actually going to do handoffs one to the next in the order that you see up there. From last year, for those of you that are repeat attendees and attended this session last year, you might recall me. My name's CJ Moses. I'm the General Manager for Government Cloud Solutions. And essentially that is dev and operations of those things that support the government. One of those things is AWS GovCloud US. But last year, we looked for feedback from our customers, as you would expect. And there's two things that came back through the feedback that I'll share with you. One was they really enjoyed the video of me wrecking my car and trying to kill myself while I was racing. And the second thing was that we had use cases, but we were talking about the use cases. We didn't have the customers themselves doing it. So we're giving you 50% of what you asked for. I'm not going to go out and wreck another car and try to kill myself, so you're not getting that this year. But what you are getting is we've doubled up on the use cases, and we're actually giving you the opportunity to hear from two of our actual customers, their use cases and how they've applied the use of AWS to their mission areas. So the flow is going to be, I'm going to speak about GovCloud to give you that foundation, just kind of make sure you understand the platform in AWS. Passing it on to Chris, who's going to talk about FedRAMP from an AWS compliance perspective. Then Jennifer is going to talk about the HHS use case and their FedRAMP ATO, and then on to Tom from JPL to talk about JPL's use case in FedRAMP /ATO. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and press on. So AWS GovCloud, telling a little bit of a story here, actually goes back to, once again, being very reactive to the customers and what the customers are telling us they need. If you're familiar with the way that we have the AWS regions, and from all the keynotes and things that you've seen so far, you've probably seen the various different regions that we have. At the time, going back about 3 years now, we didn't have a region that was actually designed around meeting some of the US government's more stringent requirements from controlled unclassified information categories such as ITAR. The ITAR side of things essentially goes back to meeting US persons only requirements. US person being a US citizen or green card holder or an agency or a company that's incorporated in the United States. So taking all of that business case information and the customer requirements, we went ahead and created a region that provides that logical and physical isolation, along with doing so in a manner that only US persons are operating it. So from Amazon's perspective, our data techs that have physical access and the administrators that have logical access are all US persons. That's from that same mindset. What we've done is, I think there's a bit of a misperception that it's for federal government US only, and that's not the case. What it actually is meeting those governmental requirements. And those governmental requirements in this case vary all the way from being a US government agency that has those strict CUI or ITAR type of requirements, all the way through to other types of things that you would find in the banking industry. Various different SEC or other types of financial industries that have regulatory requirements that would require them to be in a community cloud. Another example, the pharmaceutical industry having intellectual property rights issues that require only US persons access to that data. Those types of things are still authorized for customer use. We'll still go through a vetting process. I'll go on to the next slide so you can see that. And that vetting process actually does go through and ensure that the customers that we're bringing on aren't on any denied parties lists, meaning that if they've already been denied access to ITAR information, we're not going to give them the ability to operate on that platform. Not only from the standpoint of having the requirement to be US persons operating that environment, we also, under many of these stipulations, the data has to stay within the continental US. So in this particular case, not only is the physical data in the US, so are the logical administrators that are accessing or otherwise managing the platform. So both you have US physical personnel that are that have physical access, but as well as the logical administrators out there that are managing that environment. This allows you to meet many of these different compliance things, including the ITAR requirements. One of the things that was unique to GovCloud from the other regions is because of that unique U.S. persons requirement, we actually were in a position where we had to do a logical isolation and also have an entire separate access controlled environment, meaning that it was not only physically separated, but actually everybody that we allowed access to it had to be on a different access control roster list. That allowed us also the ability now, thereafter, to be able to now start to enhance GovCloud by adding many of the same things you find in other regions. And that is, kind of moving towards what we're talking about here today. That's allowed us to meet the FedRAMP requirements within GovCloud. Taking it a step further, in the last year since we've last talked about GovCloud to all of you, we've gone ahead and added a plethora of services. Last year we were really about getting pragmatic parity for GovCloud, moving those things into GovCloud that weren't there previously, so it's very much akin to that which is in other regions. Just in the last little while we've added things, Elastic MapReduce and CloudFormation and RDS, and continue to add on to that list. And just in the last literal few days, month if you will, we've added all the many of the different services to our management console, which we didn't have last year, if you recall, some of the fun things. So just literally just yesterday, and you probably haven't seen it with all the reInvent buzz, but we've actually added EMR to the GovCloud management console. So we're only a few small things off of actually having a very robust console for your use of this environment. That has allowed us to, bring forward both the compliance issues that many of you have to face and require you to be in such a community cloud. And in doing so, we talked a little bit about FedRAMP and the various different compliances that we have to meet. Of course, we meet a lot of the ITAR requirements, but with the advent of FedRAMP, which Chris Geil is momentarily going to come up and speak to you about, we actually have gone ahead and, because GovCloud is physically and logically isolated and separated, it has its own package, its own accreditation, or authorization, I should say, to be more correct. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Chris Geil so that he can actually walk you through what it takes within AWS to work within the FedRAMP environment, and then go on to hear from our customers that have actually done so. Chris?
Thanks. Good afternoon. As CJ said, my name is Chris Geil. I'm our manager for our federal compliance programs, as well as leading a couple other teams internally, compliance architects, strategic policy, some other teams internal to AWS. So by way of overview, real quick, I'm going to talk about FedRAMP in general, just what FedRAMP is, what its intent was, and then I'm going to move into our FedRAMP program, what we went through in our assessment, what it covers, specifically to GovCloud, and then talk about how can you leverage our FedRAMP packages from AWS in meeting compliance requirements as a federal agency, as a state agency, as a partner vendor, government contractor, what have you. And there's a key tenet that we're going to talk about there, and that's the shared responsibility model. So the FedRAMP program is the genesis of the OMB mandate under the Cloud First policy. And the federal government has recognized that U.S. government agencies can benefit from the inherent benefits from cloud computing, the scalability, the elasticity, then the security of a cloud environment. And so FedRAMP is the program that federal agencies have to align to. They have to use FedRAMP compliant cloud service providers. And the deadline for agencies to demonstrate FedRAMP compliance is coming up pretty quick. It's June of next year. And so it's a government-wide program, and FedRAMP stands for the Federal Risk and Authorization Management Program. And it's a government-wide program that standardizes the security assessment of a cloud service provider. And it's a do once, use many type of a principle so that other federal agencies can leverage the security assessment that's already been done a single time, one time. So it's a bit of reciprocity across the federal government and how you can use security assessments for cloud service providers. So by June of next year, federal agencies have to be able to demonstrate that the cloud service providers that they're using are FedRAMP compliant. So what does it mean for a federal agency then to be FedRAMP compliant? So the CSP, the cloud service provider, has one of 4 ways they can demonstrate FedRAMP compliance. Across the board, the cloud service provider has to document their implementation of all of the FedRAMP controls, and those are all based off of NIST 800-53 controls, plus an additional 45 controls, give or take. So we document our implementation of all those security controls. We have to then employ a FedRAMP accredited third-party assessor organization, or a 3PAO. We go through that assessment, generate a FedRAMP package, and then upon authorization with that package, it gets loaded up to the FedRAMP repository. There's 2 primary ways that lead to actual authorizations in the repository. There's the JAB provisional authorization, and then there's the agency authorization, the route that we took. Cloud service providers can also go through the assessment process with a 3PAO, not engage an agency for an authorization, but still load their package as a FedRAMP compliant package in the repository. And then lastly, a cloud service provider can be working with a government agency, document their implementation of FedRAMP controls, but not employ a 3PAO and still have that package in the FedRAMP repository. Notably on that package, however, it would not be eligible to go before the JAB because the 3PAO, the FedRAMP accredited 3PAO, is a requirement for the JAB to look at any packages. And as of right now, you've got a number of agencies that have gone through the JAB process, and we have gone through the agency process, and we have 2 packages out there, and I'll talk a little bit more in detail about that in a minute. But those are the 4 approaches that cloud service providers have to take in order to demonstrate FedRAMP compliance. And that is the objective for a federal agency. It is demonstrating FedRAMP compliance. So it's key to note that any one of those packages, if it's in the FedRAMP repository and an agency leverages that package, or a partner or a contractor leverages that package, that's a FedRAMP compliant package, and they get to demonstrate compliance ahead of the June 2014 deadline. So a little bit about our FedRAMP program. We have 2 agency authorizations. So when you go to the FedRAMP repository on fedramp.gov, you will see 2 packages. One for AWS East and US West, and then of course, AWS GovCloud US region. Basically, that comprises all of our US-based regions. So anything within the US is covered under our FedRAMP program. Our package, both of our packages, we went through a week-long assessment with HHS, and we'll be glad to have Jennifer come up in a minute to talk about this assessment from her perspective. But it wasn't just an HHS review. Yes, we had HHS, absolutely. We had Kevin Charest, the CISO, was present during our assessment. But we also had participation from the CDC, the NIH, and the FDA. And it was not by any means passive participation on their part. They have active workloads, so it's very much in their vested interest to ensure that we are demonstrating compliance under FedRAMP so that they can then likewise claim compliance under FedRAMP. So our FedRAMP accredited 3PAO, Verus Group in our case, they came on site, they assessed us against all FedRAMP moderate controls. We generated a security assessment report, our full FedRAMP package. It went before HHS and the 3 operational divisions reflected there. We also had FedRAMP participation. Matt Goodrich, the program manager for FedRAMP, was on the phone with us every day and was involved with the assessment as we went through it. Generated the package. We're granted the 2 authorizations back in May, and you can find both of our packages up there in the repository. We've had subsequent authorizations granted on applications, systems, and solutions based in part on our FedRAMP package, so we already see it being leveraged. So both of our packages in the repository can be leveraged by any agency, and that kind of leads to a bit of a conversation around the JAB provisional authorization and the agency authorization. A cloud service provider doesn't need to have an operational workload to go before the JAB for a provisional ATO. It can be a hypothetical workload. It's a hypothetical use case. It goes before the JAB. The JAB, as stated in the FedRAMP conduct, cannot accept any level of risk on behalf of the US federal government. So they basically take a look at the controls that are being assessed, and it's either you meet them or you don't meet them, and then you get the authorization or you don't. And then it's a matter of agencies coming in and being able to leverage that provisional Again, the key word being provisional authorization there. Our approach with the agency ATO is that we had operational workloads with HHS, a very close partner of ours that we've been working with for a number of years, and workloads with some of their operational divisions that obviously they wanted to be able to demonstrate FedRAMP compliance with. So the agency ATO route gave them the latitude and flexibility for assessing us. As is in the case in any FedRAMP package, an agency has the latitude of levying additional security requirements over and above the FedRAMP control baseline. So the FedRAMP control baseline is 297 controls. That's 252 NIST controls and 45 FedRAMP additions or enhancements to the control baseline. And that's what we were assessed against and leading to our agency authorization. So there's full rigor under an agency authorization. They looked at every one of our controls. Again, they had operational workloads, so they were able to make a risk-based decision for their authorization on our control assessment. So getting to our FedRAMP package. Our federal agencies have the choice of either requesting directly of the FedRAMP Program Management Office. There's a link on the fedramp.gov website. You can request access to any one of our packages. But you can also request directly of AWS for our agency customers who have existing relationships with account executive managers. You can come direct to AWS and request access to our FedRAMP package. And we have a way of getting those packages, the requests ingested, turned around, and get packages back to you within a three business day turnaround. And the reason we went direct to our customer agencies because we were seeing a lot of interest from not just federal agencies. And so since FedRAMP is a federal agency, they're comprised of the GSA, the DHS, the DoD. Their charter is to support federal agencies. So that means you've also got customers from the state, the local education type institutions that want to be able to leverage that security baseline that NIST has put in place and that FedRAMP has built upon. Also, you've got partners, contractors, who are not only operating government systems on behalf of the government that have to demonstrate compliance, but you've also got, and we recognize, there are partners who are building solutions on top of AWS that are going through capture or pursuit where they don't have that relationship yet with the government, but they still need to be able to demonstrate compliance, leveraging AWS, and need to have that documentation support and evidence for them to demonstrate compliance. So we've opened up access to our FedRAMP packages to all of our customer base. You can come and access it directly from us. We have a couple different iterations of the package just because we'll talk a little bit in the shared responsibility model. Not everybody needs every bit of the documentation. It's very specific to what you need the documentation for. So you can come to AWS directly. You can request access to our packages. We'll get it back to you within 3 business days. We also provide a wealth of documentation out on our websites, and there's some URLs I have at the last slide here. We push a lot of that information out there. We've also, I have compliance architects, myself, anyone on our compliance team. You can talk to the GovCloud Program Management Office. Our security solutions architects would go through solutioning exercises with you from both the security and the compliance perspective. And then we also have professional services that we have available that you can engage much more in depth. And they will sit down with you, build a roadmap, how to do the migration, and get you through that migration a lot more directly than our compliance architects. So, shared responsibility model. So how do you leverage our FedRAMP packages for you to be able to demonstrate compliance for your government agency? There's a distinction of compliance of the cloud versus compliance in the cloud. And if you have a chance to listen to my boss speak, Chad Wolf, he's got a session going on right now, you'll hear this is a primary tenet what we talk about under the shared responsibility model. We're an infrastructure service provider. That means we own the hypervisor, that virtualization management layer, all the way down to the physical security where our systems reside. Over and above that, the guest operating system, how you build your applications, how you architect your S3, your EC2 instances, all the different AWS services on there, that's for you to manage and build according to whatever regulations and standards you're adhering to. And it's not a matter of just simply throwing that obligation over the fence and dumping it in your lap. It is very much a part of, we have our infrastructure that we've built, but then it's that flexibility that we give you, because there's a myriad of use cases that our customers have and how they want to leverage AWS, and we fully recognize that, and this gives you that flexibility. But again, as I mentioned, we put out documentation, professional services, our security solutions architects. We're very much involved in helping you be successful, because that's obviously our primary goal. So as you look at that delineation of responsibility from a compliance and security perspective, what we handle at the hypervisor and below level is all of the FedRAMP moderate controls. Again, we manage the physical security of the data centers, to the management of the underlying host infrastructure, the networking, the perimeter. We handle all of that. And then you can see that over and above that, there are a couple of different sets of controls that you're going to be looking at as a customer. And that's the compliance in the cloud. So we've handled compliance of the cloud. We build the cloud, we manage the cloud, we maintain the cloud, and the security and the compliance requirements associated with that. The compliance in the cloud are the solutions and the applications and the services that you, as a government customer or a partner, are operating and running inside of AWS. You have some cross-service controls that apply across every bit of your solution that you've built in AWS, such as IAM, the Identity and Access Management. You've got controls that are very specific to a particular service. If you're operating just S3 and EC2, well, then you've got controls specific to EC2 and S3 that you've got to implement, document, and be assessed against. And then there's the more granular controls that you apply to your application. Or if you've stood up a VPC instance, you've got all the network ACLs and the subnetting, your IP space. You've got granular control down to your application security. So when we talk about shared responsibility model, we talk about AWS as an infrastructure provider. This is a key principle to understand where our, again, delineation of responsibilities lay in terms of demonstrating compliance under FedRAMP. So all of our controls that we've documented and we've implemented for FedRAMP are across our infrastructure. What you get in our FedRAMP package is a good deal of that documentation that supports you in documenting your controls and that other space that you're responsible for, your cross-service controls, your service-specific controls, and then your application-specific controls. So the FedRAMP package, right now, our full federal agency package is about 17 documents. We have a package that's specific for our state, local, and education customers, because again, there's been some demonstrated interest there from those kinds of agencies and institutions for our FedRAMP package. And then we've got a package for our partners who are building a solution to go after either a capture or they want to build a FedRAMP compliant solution on AWS to sell to their government customers. So we have 3 different packages that we make available, and they all support our customers in the specific use cases that they need. We also are going to be disseminating very shortly an SSP template that takes the FedRAMP SSP, basically gives you a brief summary of AWS's portion of that control and how you inherit that from our FedRAMP package. It refers your government customer back to our FedRAMP package, how to get access to it, but also talks a little bit about, okay, this is an AC control or an AU control or an SE control. This is what you need to document for your space. And we're going to continue to refine that as we get feedback from you on what's the best support that you need from that particular type of a resource. So shared responsibility, key tenet, it's a key principle that we want to make sure that our customers understand. It really sets us up for, okay, understand what's in my court versus what's in your court. And so it's another graphical representation of that separation of responsibility there, where we handle the list of those types of services that are reflected there on the slide. Physical security, the compute infrastructure, the virtualization layer, obviously, again, all of our network infrastructure and facilities. We are assessed at any given time against well over 650 controls. And so you'll probably hear this throughout several different other speeches, that we have FedRAMP authorization, we also have ISO, PCI, SOC, and those are all security certifications. And we hit that high water mark for our customers. So when we talk about GovCloud US and we talk about our FedRAMP packages in the other regions, this is not simply a security posture or a compliance posture that's benefiting a single subset of our customers. This is something that benefits all of our customers, because we very much centralize, in a centralized manner, manage our services so that what we do across the board from our different compliance programs benefits every one of our customers using AWS. And so you can see the types of certifications and compliance programs that we've supported under our infrastructure. So So there's a couple of different links and resources for you to take a look at. We obviously list our 2 FedRAMP packages for our GovCloud US region, as well as our other public regions. We have an SSP template we'll be publishing and disseminating for our folks. We have a compliance portal. We have several white papers out there. We have a security best practices. We have an auditing checklist. We've got a risk and compliance white paper out there. There's a great deal of information that's usable in those white papers and other documentation on our websites that will support you in documenting your authorization packages. And then, of course, we have a security center and then a documentation center. And then if you want to reach out directly to our AWS compliance team, there's our email address. Please feel free. We respond back in very short order. This is how you can reach out to us. If you don't have any other means of reaching out to AWS to request copies of our FedRAMP package, that email address will get you started in the right direction. We'll get you pointed to whom your proper POC is, and talk a little more about any questions you have about our FedRAMP programs, our other compliance programs worldwide. So with that is, in summary, our FedRAMP program, how we approach the FedRAMP program internally for us, how you can leverage our FedRAMP packages, the kinds of support resources that we make available as you document your SSP or your environment against FedRAMP compliance requirements, and then how you can further reach out to us if you have any follow-up questions. And we'd definitely love to hear back from you. We definitely thrive on our customer feedback. So with that, I'm going to bring up Jennifer Gray, who is the Federal Cloud Lead for the Department of Health and Human Services, somebody whom we worked with very closely over several grueling weeks of going through our FedRAMP assessment. And I'm sure you'll be interested to hear about her perspective on our FedRAMP program.
This one, right?
Jennifer? It is, yeah.
Hello, good afternoon. Well, Chris did a great job of describing the whole FedRAMP process, so I'm not going to do that. I think what you're all here to listen to is the actual use case of the HHS AWS ATO, how we did it, what we did, and the time it took. Some of the key drivers that instilled us to start moving ahead on our cloud adoption was, of course, FedRAMP and our HHS Cloud Strategy Memo. With FedRAMP being a policy for federal agencies to comply with, we were looking at all the cloud providers that we have internally to HHS, across HHS. And for many of you who are not familiar with our organizations, it's comprised of 12 operational divisions that have their own CIO, their own CISO, their own security SMEs. And they pretty much operate on their own. So we went and we spoke with the FedRAMP PMO office and said, how are we going to do this? How will we leverage this? So we spoke with very key stakeholders across HHS, which was the Center for Disease Control, FDA, and the National Institutes of Health. 3 of them were very interested because a lot of their programs and missions were really already using AWS, and they needed to start moving forward with their FedRAMP compliance. So we evaluated our internal system, and we looked at our cloud inventory. Thanks to OCIO's enterprise architecture team, we pulled a lot of the data across HHS to seeing how many systems are actually using the AWS environment. And with that, we forwarded that over to our CIO, and we said, this is really critical to a lot of people's missions here, and I think we can work together with AWS and the FedRAMP PMO to achieve this. So the first thing we needed to do was build that effective team. And for those of you who have watched Oblivion, yes, this is where I got this from. So we needed senior leadership, and at that time, our acting deputy CIO was Matthew Schellbetter. And he reached out across HHS to all of our CIOs and pretty much told them, we will sponsor this, but we also need partnerships among all of you. And for those of you who are interested, please see Jennifer. It's like, thanks, Matthew. Then from there, I worked with each of the security SMEs from the FDA, NIH, and CDC, pulling really high technical security SMEs, also some architecture solution teams from NIH and FDA. Because these are the people that are working with the AWS environment already. They know what they need, and they know what to be looking for. We didn't want to reinvent anything. we worked very closely with Matthew Goodrich. We call him Matt, and Matt was side by side with us going through the process. And then again, working with Chris Giles, Chad Wolf, and Chris and his team were amazing. There was that complete transparency between us and their team. We told them, this is what we're looking for, and this is what we need, and they worked with us day and night. It was, we started actually June of 2012 with Brett McMillan, who is our account manager for HHS. And he said, we're more than happy to work with you and your team, and we can try to work this together. And we started working together as one team of January 2013. So it was a 6-month process, a very grueling one. We worked very closely with the Veris group, which was their third-party assessor. It was very interesting because this was the first time we were doing this as a department. Because again, like I said, HHS is federated. They have their own CIO shop. They have their own CISO shop. So we brought all of the people together, and we were working as one team. Out of the whole ATO process, one of the things that we created was a FedRAMP security authorization process, step-by-step standard operating procedures, so that we documented everything that we were doing across HHS with our security team and with AWS that was consistent with the FedRAMP program. We released it through our CISO shop. It was reviewed by our CISOs and the CISO working group, and they distributed among HHS. And pretty much it was a nice step-by-step process to let the operational divisions leverage if they decided that they wanted to go ahead and authorize other cloud service providers they're currently using. One thing we also produced out of the standard operating procedures is that FedRAMP PMO, Matt Goodrich, asked us if he could borrow it, and he actually presented it to all the federal agencies to leverage so that if they wanted to start integrating the FedRAMP process into their own security assessment authorization process, they can kind of see what we did from HHS. I love this picture because it kind of shows how the whole process started. So you're looking at the green part. We started talking to Frank Bateman, our CIO. We talked to Kevin Charest, and we talked to Matthew Schellbetter, and they're like, we'll make sure that we've got the partnerships among the operational divisions. We had our kickoff in January. We met with AWS's risk and compliance team. They're ready to go, and we had CDC, FDA, and NIH ready to go with us as well. It was a total of 15 full-time equivalents that we pulled together, all of them who have other daunting tasks at their operational divisions, dedicated over 80 hours with me, which I'm sure was kind of taxing for them. And we went through this process with Chris and his team, going through over, we say 297 controls, but I want to say we went over 300 controls that were not even part of the FedRAMP process, because we have those specialty niches from the FDA, from CDC, from NIH. Everyone has their own security concerns, and this was a great opportunity for them to address it and speak to AWS and let them know, hey, what about this? How are we going to address this concern? So we did our initial system security review. We reviewed everything. We did the full IV and V. And a lot of people are like, why are you doing that? They have a third-party assessor who will do that for them. They're paying somebody to do that. Well, I work with interesting folks, and they like to make sure that they can look at it, they can evaluate it. And it also gave them an opportunity to go back to their operational divisions and share it with their CISO and say, hey, this is what we have, and we might want to take a look at these controls because we have some concerns. There was a lot of going back and forth with this, and I have to say that one of the key things that came out of that process was the 3 C's: communication, collaboration, and compromise. Compromise was huge because we wanted to stay within the FedRAMP scope, addressing the NIST 853 controls and the additional controls that FedRAMP had already stated. We didn't want to go beyond that, and we talked to the special operatives who had additional controls that they wanted in the package, and we said, you can do that, you can tailor that, but we need to stay within scope so that other agencies and other operational divisions can leverage it from the way it looks, the way that we've evaluated, the standard controls that were required. So then we get through, and then if you can see, we reviewed the draft SAR. We called it preliminary SAR. For many of those who don't know what SAR is, a security assessment report. So after the Veris group conducted their security assessment, we pulled all the teams back together and we sat in a closed room. It was a grueling week, I would say. Right, Chris? We stayed in there going back and forth. The Veris presented it. We went through all of the findings, going back and forth until we got to a point where we felt really good about what we're seeing here. And what I liked about it is that we did have, FDA brought in a lot of important issues that we addressed, and then it was really critical for our security team to come up with, okay, how do we address this? What are some other things? We worked with Matt Goodrich over at the FedRAMP PMO, and he was on every call that we had every day. 2 o'clock we had those calls, touching points with his ISOs, saying this is how they're addressing it. How do we feel about this? Are we on the right path? We came up with some really interesting ways of addressing the security controls and having AWS come up with alternative solutions, also with HHS. And that's something that's really key, because I know one of the key things with the government is that we have these security standards. And if it doesn't look like it, then we're not going to go with it. Well, we need to start looking beyond that, especially with innovation and with cloud computing and virtual environments. We have really sharp people out there, and they know. And if you ask them, they will tell you, well, there is a way to address that security control. You can do this. And that's what came out of that session. So we went through it, and then we've presented it to Kevin Charast. We went through all of it again, and he issued it. He accepted it, and he said, yep, let's go ahead and move this forward, and we'll hand it over to Frank Bateman, who will officially sign it. Submitted the package and sent it off to the FedRAMP PMO, and then within 2 weeks after they reviewed it, another review to making sure that we were compliant with their process. We received the great news, and it was wonderful news. We were so relieved because we put a lot of work into it, a lot of time and effort. It's more, we've built this relationship with AWS and also with the operational divisions, and we want to do more. We know we can, and we have that inertia and that energy to do it. Some of the interesting things that came out of it is that I wanted to cost out what it cost for security assessment and authorization. So based on the level of effort, looking at the labor resources, we costed it out at $275K to do one security assessment and authorization for a cloud provider, and that's just infrastructure. We're not looking at platform or software as a service. This is just infrastructure. And the potential savings that we had across HHS, and the number that I have there is based on, I think it was like 3 or 4 octaves, looking at the octave levels. That doesn't even tack in the other missions that are actually leveraging it. So the potential saving just in May, we saved over $1 million so that other octaves can leverage this ATO. That information was then shared with David McClure over at GSA, who did share that out at a White House briefing. So that is what we're looking for. How do we save money in the government, while at the same time using technology to advance our solutions? It's a very interesting mix, if you will, in the federal government to try to do all three. But we're doing it, and we're working very hard at that. So here, I'm not going to bore you with the thing. So again, May 20th, we got our compliance with FedRAMP. We were consistent with FedRAMP. And then some of the key lessons learned here is that in order to do something this big, and I want to say it was huge because we were the first agency that actually stuck our necks out there to try this FedRAMP process. Matt Goodrich said, we're here, we can explain it, we'll go to agency day. We actually had him come to our office to explain the process to our security technical team. We merged the existing process into our own security assessment process. We call it CNA, but now it's called a security assessment and authorization process. And we kind of looked at our enterprise lifecycle. Where does this fit? We looked at the gaps and we aligned it. We didn't change anything, we just added to it, but we streamlined a lot of the effort. We ensured that all the security artifacts were provided 1 week prior to our second phase review with AWS. We were constantly on weekly calls with AWS, going through all of our initial findings. And that was very critical because AWS was able to say, okay, wait a minute, there's this many that we need to address with HHS. And they can go back to their teams and start working on it. Because we didn't want to waste time, we didn't want to waste resources, we wanted to get to a solution. Developing a full project schedule with the key stakeholders in advance was critical because, again, NIH, CDC, FDA, those teams had additional work. This was outside of their scope. This was all volunteer. They volunteered their time for this effort, which is, I mean, we can say that we scoped out 160 hours, but I know the time after work and the time before work that I would reach out to the folks at FDA, CDC, and NIH. These people put more than 160 hours into this process. We developed a FAQ after the ATO. So right after we received the FedRAMP compliance, we presented an FAQ for all of our optives so that they know what the package contains and the level of effort, what is needed for them to continue to leverage that ATO for their existing systems. It's very critical because people think, oh, you got an ATO, we're good to go, we can operate. Not yet. There's, like we were showing the shared responsibility, there's a level of effort that still needs to be completed for the system owner. Next, we actually collected resources, metrics for future planning. So now that we know what it costs for security assessment authorization, we can start planning ahead as additional services are added to the AWS ATO and future cloud service providers as well. We know what it's going to cost, we know what type of skill sets we need, and we know the kind of commitment is required. It's still a work in process, and you just get better at it. But it was a really great experience, and the one thing that I have to say is that you need to build that relationship with your cloud service provider and have that transparency with them. And that's what the FedRAMP process did for us and with AWS and the Veris group and the operational division. So we have a very good relationship going into it, knowing what we really want out of this. As soon as you do that and identify those things, those are critical measures as you continue to move forward to your ATO. And with that said, I'm going to bring Tom up here who can kind of share his use case with JPL. Thank you.
Okay. We now have ATO to talk. I want to talk about motivation. It's a painful process. It's a grueling process, but it's worth it if the motivation is there. So why are you here today? What's your motivation for attending our talk? Who of you already are using GovCloud? So that's about, it's more than I thought. It's about 20, 25 people. Who wants to use it but is waiting for an ATO? Who wants to use it? It's just the front of the room. It's about 20 people. And who's waiting for an ATO? Nobody. So why are you here? I'm probing on that because the motivation turned out to be a really big deal. And that was the breaking point for us in a good way. So I'll talk about that a little bit. We're all about using the cloud to affect science. My name is Tom Soderstrom. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at JPL. And we have two much more important people here in the room today for this purpose. It's Jonathan Chang. Will you stand up, Jonathan? And Matt Dorensky. Will you stand up, Matt, so they can see you? These guys understand this process. They made it happen. We didn't have 15 FTEs. We had us. And it was painful, but it didn't take off until we had the proper motivation. So we want to use the cloud to do more science. We've had some use cases. We wanted to start using cloud. We've used it for 5 years. We wanted to do all these things, and we were hoping it would pay off, but we couldn't do anything ITAR. And we found that ITAR is International Traffic in Arms. It's the export control. And what we found is that that was a big barrier. In the beginning with Amazon, we looked and saying, okay, what percentage of your data is ITAR? Turned out that was a bad question. Had nothing to do with it. If anything was ITAR, it's all ITAR, because they didn't want to split hairs. So turned out ITAR was a big deal for us. So we needed to go from this environment where we create a project the same old way, we assembled a crew, to a way where we can store the data offsite. This is JPL a few years ago when we were burning. To this way, where we can pull the infrastructure and experiment as we go, and now do it safely with ITAR. So how could we do that? We started by getting the proper motivation. And the motivation here was to understand cloud computing. It's about 5 years ago. So we tried outreach sites, games. We tried 10 different clouds hands-on, so we could understand it. That's our DNA. That's our motivation. If we can understand it end-to-end, we can use it. But we couldn't do ITAR. ITAR was limited to our own environment. So what were we to do? Last year, we were able to land Curiosity on Mars, and that was a very big accomplishment. We were also able to tell the story to the world through the cloud at the same time. You saw the pictures at the same time as we did. And we delivered lots and lots of data, and we used the cloud. All of a sudden, the motivation was sky high. We now had a really good use case for the cloud. It matters. So most of our missions, and this is a mission, use ITAR. So when we said we use cloud for Curiosity, it's not all of Curiosity. It's the pieces that were the public outreach. Now, how could we use it for actual mission-critical work? Although this was pretty damn mission-critical, as mission-critical as it gets. So we started doing what we always do. We argue. And we found out that we needed to do FISMA moderate, and we needed to do ITAR. And here comes the crux. The FedRAMP doesn't talk about ITAR. So lesson learned, I wish we could have done what Jennifer did, which is to get everybody together and just hammer it, hammer it, hammer it. Instead, we had several false attempts. We tried it, people got busy, then we tried again, people got busy, until finally the motivation was there, and I became the guy with the whip, and just cracking the whip with us and our customers and NASA and everybody, so that the motivation was there because we needed it desperately. But we realized there were two separate pieces, and we treated them separately. There was the FISMA moderate, and there was the ITAR. So we actually created two ATOs. And I'll talk a little bit more about what it means. So motivation, right? When you stick your neck out, as Jennifer said, it's not always good to be first. So you want everybody on your team. So we spent a lot of time socializing this and explaining and getting everybody to feel comfortable. It took longer, but it was worth it. So we had everybody that you see here concurred, added something that they needed to see to be comfortable signing it. But we have that, and we're very comfortable with it. But it all came back to motivation again. It's why do you do it? Why are you going to spend this time and effort? What will you get out of it? And for us, remember that nebula picture of the science. So when we talked about it, we didn't talk about the pain and suffering of going through this process, but what you would get afterwards. And that really is the key. So one of the things we created is, and we highly recommend this, and hopefully you can do it faster than we took to do it, which is to create your own cloud computing commodity board. And it's a commodity. We buy electricity the same way. We buy water the same way. We now buy computing cycle the same way. And the cloud computing commodity board that Jonathan and Matt and I sit on, among others, reviews these things and say, okay, what do we need from cloud providers? So we have many options. ITAR, we have ourselves, and we have Amazon. That's it so far. But the ATO is something that we have, and it's all of a sudden is enabling a lot of work. And it's enabling this type of work. Now, as it turns out, this is not necessarily ITAR work, but it's very important to us. And a piece of it is ITAR. And the user thinks, if it can handle ITAR, it can handle it all. Matt Durensky, our security guy, says, if it's in GovCloud, I can do my normal forensics, I'm happy. Now, it turned out we actually had to invent some forensics with Amazon, and Amazon was very helpful with that, so that we could have the Inspector General go in and check and segment off some computers and do forensics on them. That was their deal breaker, and everyone had their own deal breaker, but once we understood it, we could work with it. So radar processing, very large scale. A few countries are not allowed to see it, so we put it in ITAR, in GovCloud. Virtual workshops, users are okay, but the code was sensitive, so we put it in GovCloud. Big data analytics of JPL-sensitive data, it's a perfect place to put it. Mars exploration rover data, could be that some of it is ITAR. We're not sure, but they didn't want to take the risk, so put it in GovCloud. Rapid prototyping where some data is sensitive. All of a sudden, we're seeing the level of innovation spin much, much faster than it ever did before. And now we've already asked for this. We want Glacier. Who's using Glacier today? About 10 of you. It's tremendously cost effective. It's something we really want. But we need ITAR, so we need it in the GovCloud. So I keep hammering this beating on this drum. And this is the use case of Glacier, why it's cost effective. So in the future, we're now looking, it's about the science. It's about analyzing lots and lots and lots of data. And we've found 1,000 exoplanets, planets that are planets outside our solar system. 100 of them are in the sweet spot where they're about the right distance from its sun, where maybe it can harbor life. That's why we do cloud computing. That's our motivation, is to use it for science, partnering, et cetera. And that the ATO process was the mechanism to get there. But until we had the motivation, it was hopeless. We had so many false starts. So get the motivation, what you will do with it. Then get your, like Jennifer said, get the team on board, and especially your security team. And then talk about why you will do it. It was amazing when we talked to the NASA ITAR side. They had no problem with it. They said, oh, we can do more science. That's a wonderful thing. So it's not necessarily a fight, but it can be a lot of work. And we really appreciate Jennifer for sticking your neck out and being yet one other who will say, yes, it's possible. And for Amazon for actually creating the GovCloud that enables us to do more science. So if you want to know more details, ask us afterwards. Matt and Jonathan and I will stick around for a while. And also, Matt will talk in much more detail about security. So Matt, stand up again for a second. I'm going to embarrass you. So Matt is now drumming the drum that I've been drumming for a while, which is we think that the cloud can be more secure than what we do in our internal data center. And now it's our security guy that's saying that. But if you do it right, and so he's going to tell you right after this talk how we do that. And he and Jonathan will talk about governance in the cloud tomorrow at 1:30. And governance, it's all about making progress using proper governance. So that was our talk, and we appreciate you listening, and we're happy to answer questions afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Oh, yeah, we're good for now. So that concludes our presentation today. The one thing I do want to go ahead and ask you to do is, we've got moon stuff up here too. Look at that. You had all kinds of fun stuff. One more time.
So what that is you can use any mobile device to control all the data that's on the moon. And it's moon tours. It's the future of processing, we believe, because now the data lives in the cloud, it's processed in the cloud, it's Hadooped in the cloud, et cetera, but it's controlled through your mobile device. Now, if you have sensitive data, you can choose to put in GovCloud, or if it isn't sensitive, put it somewhere else. But that's the future. So, sorry about that.
Oh, we always
now
love.
I'm done.
We always love when Tom comes because he always comes with all kinds of crazy, fun moon stuff, or Mars stuff in many cases. So just press it on here. One thing we'd like you to do is go ahead and provide feedback on the presentations that you saw today. That way that we can go ahead and next year take it up even another level with your feedback. So with that, we'll say thank you for attending and look forward to seeing you later on today. Thank you.